So I'm going to say hi and welcome to the Adversity Psychologist Podcast. I'm Dr. Tara Quinterillo, and it's been a little while since I've recorded an episode, so I'm really glad to have a real life guest in the hot seat again. So I have Maike Mullenders with me. Would you like to say hello and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Hello, I'm Maike and I'm a yoga teacher and author. I'm a volunteer for Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, and I am the lived experience facilitator for the Luna Foundation. And I wrote my book about losing my father to suicide, and it's called The Confession, A Journey to Acceptance.
And I appreciate you coming on today. We have covered on the podcast before on a couple of occasions suicide. I had some really great feedback about the fact that we're tackling it, we're talking about it, we're doing it in a really open way. And I was so interested to get you on because you're coming from a slightly different angle. And if you're comfortable, would you like to tell us a little bit about your backstory that led you to write your book and that led you to support other people?
Yeah, so I lost my father to suicide when I was 21, and it didn't really come as a shock as such, because he had made previous attempts, one when I was 11 and one when I was a teenager. And I think for me, I felt so isolated at the time, and there really wasn't anyone who I could talk to. And I was just also, particularly the first time he tried them when I was 11, I was just so confused. I didn't really understand what was happening. I was told that life was too much for him and that's why he'd chosen to make this decision. And I guess I just didn't question it. That was just accepted. It was something, if life was too much for you, then that was what you would do. And I think that in itself for me was a really dangerous lesson to have. So yeah, I guess I just didn't like the thought of anyone else feeling that alone, which is why I chose to write the book, to start talking about it. And actually in starting to support others in survivors of bereavement by suicide, I've also just gained so much from that myself on a personal level. So it really is a give and take. I
hadn't thought about that as well, actually, in terms of what you've gained by sharing your story, because sometimes it can be quite therapeutic, can't it, to talk about that, kind of work through some of those grief issues.
Absolutely. It's been amazing. Even very close friends who have read the book and have later then just said, gosh, we didn't know you'd been through all that. And just a real outpouring of warmth and love that I never expected. And I guess because particularly then as a child, I felt very unworthy. I had very low self-esteem. Even now as an adult, to receive that kind of validation and to feel that I've been seen was incredibly healing.
Yeah. So I was going to ask about that, because I know that's something you'd mentioned to me when we were kind of planning the podcast. It's just, the impact on you in those kind of formative years, as a teenager, your self-esteem, your self-worth, particularly kind of thinking about how mental health was maybe viewed in those days as well, people's understanding of it, the causes of people dying by suicide.
I guess also the idea that if my dad's mental health issues were never diagnosed, so it was something, I guess as a child I didn't really even think he had mental health issues. It wasn't really a term that was bandied about at that time. He was never in treatment. His first attempt, no professional even knew about it.
Gosh.
The second attempt, he did end up in hospital, but was then very quickly discharged.
Right.
So I guess as a child, I thought, well, if you're out of hospital, you're not on medication, you're not seeing anyone, then you're not ill.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was only much later when I started to struggle with my own mental health, and particularly struggle to have a relationship,
Yeah.
that I started to think, oh, okay, he wasn't well. And I think also in my family then, but I guess in a lot of families, these things aren't talked about. You know, it's just sort of swept under the carpet. And I think I disassociated from a lot of what was going on at home. So I adored school. School was my safe space.
Really?
And I loved it. And so I kind of, I sort of separated those two parts of my life very, very strongly.
Maybe it's a little kind of, defense mechanism, safety mechanism.
Totally. And I think, the older I became then, the more that I escaped into school and my friends and that side of life.
And were you aware of that at the time, do you think? Or is that something, as you look back now?
I think that's very much something as I look back now. I mean, I feel very wise in retrospect. I think at the time I was just sort of bundling along, really just trying to survive, I guess.
What did help you? Was there anything particular? So we talked a little bit about kind of those stabilizing factors like school and friends, but as you became an adult, I noticed, you said you got into things like yoga, for example. What are some of the things that have continued to be helpful for you?
I think initially it was therapy. So I tried therapy a few times and I never quite made the connection.
Yeah.
But then much later, I think in my late 20s, I started working with a therapist who really took the time to make me feel safe. And from that point, I then also had group therapy with him. And it was this idea that there were other people. I think I always felt so different.
Yeah.
And so the idea that other people struggled, not necessarily with the same things as me, but I think I always thought everyone else was managing life really well. And I was, out there on my own. So that really, really helped. And
so those were people with the same lived experience, if that's all right to ask. So they'd also lost people through suicide?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Just people who were struggling for all kinds of different
kind of adverse.
reasons.
Yeah.
And it just really helped me feel less alone. And I think that was so important to me. And then I found the yoga, and I think I often say that therapy helped me to understand myself.
Yes. Yeah.
And that yoga helped me to change. So in yoga, again, I had an amazing yoga teacher, and she would bring in the philosophy of yoga as well. So it wasn't just about the postures. So it was about non-harm. It was about compassion. It was about letting go. It was about self-study. It was about discipline, all these, and also just accepting yourself as you are. And I guess in yoga terms, that's about maybe accepting that you can't put your leg behind your head. But once we start to accept just our body as it is, and starting to come into contact with yourself at a deeper level, and I guess self-love, it had never. I just hated myself so much. I'd got so stuck into this idea of perfection. And I remember my therapist at one point saying to me, everything is either black or white with you. Where's the grey area? Where's the middle ground?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just,
What did you think? When you were met with that, what did you think? Is that all right to ask?
I think I just thought, well, everything is black or white. I think my coping strategy, I guess, and this is, again, looking back in retrospect, was to try and control everything.
Which is a common response, isn't it? That's what we want as humans, to be in control, manage that uncertainty.
And the only way I knew to do that was to categorize things as either safe or unsafe, good or bad.
Yeah.
And so then you do lose that middle ground. And I guess, the space I'm in now is that I just love this idea that things are fluid. Life is
me too.
Is fluid, and something can serve us and be good for us in one moment, and then later we can discover, okay, that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't have to be these extremes, but it really did take me a long time to get there.
It's kind of a process that you went through with the therapy. But what I really love as well is you said that you had the yoga and the therapy, that you actually found that a really useful combination for you.
Absolutely. So I had the therapy, and I kind of stopped the therapy at the point that I had my twins, because there was just so much else going on.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And then I came to the yoga after a break, and it was almost as if it was the perfect time for that to feed in.
So kind of sometimes naturally transition happens, or things come along at the right time, don't they? And, we've talked about this off camera, but parenting's hard. There's so much to fit in, and that time for yourself, and particularly self-development, it sometimes gets pushed down the agenda, doesn't it?
Totally. And it's also, I guess, being open and ready for things. And I think that's also what I've learned, is just gratitude. And I try to practice that as much as I can. And when I feel myself becoming unhappy again, or sort of slipping down, I go, no, start practicing gratitude again.
And you catch yourself. You notice when that's slipped, and you're able to catch yourself.
Totally. I think I'm much more self-aware, and also I think I've constructed my life so that it works for me. I don't overfill it. I know I'm not good with stress, so I really take care of myself, and I think that's something that I've learned to do.
And that you're okay with that, because we were talking as well sometimes about being a parent, being a mum, particularly that guilt, of doing stuff for yourself, or prioritizing yourself, especially doing it consistently, like you say, which has been part of your journey. It can be hard, because that guilt monster, that inner critic, can rock up that we shouldn't be doing that. It's not okay.
Yeah, I always say that when you have your baby, they should give you a bag for the guilt to go along with it.
That's such a good idea. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness, I need a suitcase,
But yeah, absolutely. I think I do now prioritize taking care of myself. And I mean, goodness me, I'm not perfect. There are times when everything goes out of balance, but I now really see the importance of that. And actually, I also see the importance of modeling that to my children. So
interesting. We come to your values as a parent there then. So that's really important, the part of your kind of grief journey, your journey in terms of your self-esteem, your self-worth, your values around parenting, and what you want to instill.
And I guess I've always been quite open with the children in terms of, I know there are parts of me that are vulnerable.
Okay.
I know there are bits of me that aren't necessarily massively robust, but I share that. I share how I've built my resilience in as much as is, age appropriate. But I think my daughter, who's 18, has just finished her A-levels, and she said to me, I want a gap year. And because I've worked really hard for my GCSEs, for my A-levels, and she's, and she just said, I need a break. And I said, good, take a break. You know,
that's okay.
We don't have to be on this trajectory of next thing. I said, you know, life's complicated enough. Create your own, you know.
I love that, because I know one of the things I was going to bring in, and she said something really, really interesting off camera, that while you were having your therapy, you said life still goes on at the same time. And as a psychologist myself, who obviously sees people for one-to-one therapy, sometimes people can kind of see therapy, counselling as something they have to have in order to then get on with their life. And you have this really interesting take that I thought would be good for our listeners about this kind of parallel process.
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, I did have this sense of, right, before I have a relationship, before I have children, I need to be perfect. I need to be
interesting.
sorted, and I need to be healed. But I think what I've realized is that what I've experienced, what I've been through, is part of me. And although I'm in a much better space, and although I know myself much better, there will be moments when I suddenly feel triggered, or I suddenly feel this deep well of sadness. And so I think it's learning to be with that. And again, you know, it's that fluid idea that I was talking about, that, you know, it goes up and down, that there are waves. And I think I've been triggered by having children in a way that I never expected to be.
Okay. So like, tell us a little bit about what you've noticed there. What have you observed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I always thought, if a child had a secure, a safe, a stable background without, you know, a lot of the instability that I had, that they would just be okay, that they would be happy. But of course, you know, teenagers have all their own struggles to go through. Regardless,
we both know about that,
and I think I just had to sort of stop and think about that more deeply. I think I was so entrenched in, you know, that child part of me that was so unhappy that I just I hadn't realized that regardless, they're going to have their own ups and downs, their own worries. And I think as well, sometimes that was quite frustrating. I would see them being unhappy or dissatisfied, and that child part of me would almost be quite cross. How dare you? You've got nothing to,
that's really
be worried about. This is really unfair. But then I had to catch myself and go, that's my inner child that still feels in some way, sort of saying it in inverted commas, but badly done by, or feels just desperately sad
because of what happened to you.
Totally. And I think, but I can't parent from that place, because if you say to me, do you want them to understand what you went through? No, I definitely don't. So but I guess it's having that awareness. That's what's important.
And being able to kind of, I do a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy. So part of that kind of model is that just being able to catch those moments and go, look what's happening here. I'm getting really hooked with that part of me. And how am I responding? How do I want to respond? And sometimes we might catch it, sometimes we might not. Might be more of a retrospective thing. But also, I love the fact you're very compassion based, aren't you? You've used that word a lot, and off camera as well. Being kind to ourselves, that there might be days where we don't get it right, or that our past is really dominating. Sometimes, as you say, we get a bit triggered, and being compassionate.
I think I had a really brutal inner critic for a long time, and I was really unkind to myself.
Really?
And I think, again, yoga sort of caught that and just went, no, don't do that. You wouldn't speak to someone else like that. Why are you speaking to yourself like that? And it's
such a good point, isn't it? Like if our friends were going through something similar, how would we talk to them versus how we talk to ourselves? And usually we are much harsher, aren't we, to ourselves?
Totally. And I think I thought, oh, but you're just letting yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're not letting yourself off the hook, because you're thinking about it, you're processing it, you're not necessarily going to go and do that again. But I think by just being really brutal to yourself, you're not going to help yourself move forward.
Such a good descriptor, that, isn't it? That kind of being brutal. Because sometimes we are so harsh on ourselves. And it's so interesting because you brought this in before, that kind of almost kind of perfectionist element. I've got to have had this therapy and be in this certain place before I can have a relationship, before I can have children. And I was just interested in that kind of next part as well, in terms of life going alongside the kind of therapeutic journey, that it's okay to start living life and,
totally
being immersed in that.
I think because I was in therapy for such a long time then, at certain points, I just felt like life was on hold. And I sort of thought,
therapy needs to be done, like a tick box kind of thing.
But I want to get to the next bit, and then sometimes life sort of takes over anyway.
It does. Has a sneaky way of doing that, doesn't it?
Totally. It carries on in spite of you. But I think coming back to that perfectionistic bit, I think as a child, I think I knew the situation I was in was very odd. My parents' relationship was very complicated. They had a 25-year age gap, so my dad was much older than my mum. And I think part of my survival then, part of how I sort of got myself through it, was that I always thought, when I'm in charge of my own life, things will be different.
Interesting.
Things will be perfect. And then when I was in charge of my own life and things weren't perfect and it was still challenging, I think that was a real kick in the teeth.
How did you cope with that? So when you noticed it, what did you do?
I mean, again, I don't think it was that clear. This is, again, talking in retrospect. But I would I remember doing it as a student, and it makes me so sad when I think about it now. I would write the date on a piece of paper, and I would stick it on the notice board, and I would go, okay, from this point, everything's going to be okay. And then something would happen, normally based on me in a relationship or something, and it would all go to pot. And I would have to take the piece of paper down. And then I would write the date again. And I was just so full of hope, and I was just so desperate for life to be okay, for me to feel okay. And I just got so caught up in it.
It's kind of like almost a bit cyclical by the sounds of it.
Totally. And whereas now, I mean, this is a mothering confession, but I sent my daughter to school, my youngest daughter. I thought it was a non-uniform day. It wasn't. And, you can imagine she wasn't very, very happy. I've never been allowed to forget about it.
It's amazing how they can hold on to those things.
But now I sort of go, it's okay. You made a mistake. And if
it's that compassion, right?
Yeah. If it stays with me till the day I die, if it's said at my funeral, do you remember that day Mum sent me to school in non-uniform? I just think I've just become softer about it.
You can be a little bit kinder to yourself.
Absolutely.
Very human. Absolutely. And I do think kids have a wonderful way of holding on to stuff. like that,
Yeah.
don't they? And bringing it up at any moment.
Absolutely. And if we bring stuff up, that's not appreciated.
Yes. Remember the time that you did this. That compassion base I absolutely love. And what was it that made you decide? Because obviously there's being aware of your journey, there's working through your journey, a combination of therapy, yoga, bringing that into your kind of everyday life. But then you decided to write a book and start to help others. And I'm just interested in where that came from, what you get from that. So if anybody listening is thinking about, well, what can I get from reading your book? What can I get by maybe going to a group if they've lost someone through suicide?
Yeah, I think the wanting to help others was part of that compassion.
Yeah,
because I think I started to feel stronger. And then I just really had this strong urge that as I felt better about myself, I wanted to give something.
Okay.
It was
that wanting to give. That compassion seems to be very part of you rather than something that's just happened because of what's happened in your life. I'm just wondering if you're just a compassionate person anyway, are you?
Maybe. I think it was so disjointed when I was a child that I don't really know. I feel it must be at its source that I've sort of come back to who I was. But definitely for me, having written the book, then getting feedback on the book from people saying, gosh, in part, this was what I experienced.
Wow. Okay.
It's so helpful just to have it out there. And I've tried to, I think I've read lots of books myself as part of my process, but I often found that I got very lost in them, almost as if it triggered me back. So I think I always struggled at school. So I had this, along with this lack of self-worth, I had this sense of, well, actually, you're quite stupid. You're not intelligent. So often when I read, there are amazing books out there, but I sort of get a bit lost in them. And I go, I don't quite understand that. That's gone above my head. I don't think it's true, but somehow it can just trigger me back. So I tried to write my book.
Though, isn't it? Important to talk about.
Yeah. I tried to write my book in a really approachable way. So I tried to write it as it was in the moment. And funnily enough, it came out a year ago. And I even feel like I've changed since then.
Wow,
even
really?
in sort of moved forward with it. But yeah, I would definitely encourage people to at least try a group. I think whatever your challenge is, I certainly know from the SOBS group that I run, I always say I'm the sort of first point of contact for people. And I always say when they first call up, I say, look, you're now part of a club that you never, ever wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
But, people really hold each other up in that space. They share so openly their experiences. Yes. I mean, there's no obligation to share. You can just come and listen. Yeah. And that's fine too. But yeah, there's something
pressure, that kind of just being held in a space. You don't have to talk. Just to let people know, the kind of SOB stands for Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide.
Yes, which is, it's a national organisation, but actually they run local groups.
Yeah. So people can look that up and see where their nearest group would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's something about sharing your humanness. I'm big on that. Yeah. If we all present ourselves as I used to try to do, as perfect, and that came down to everything. I'd spend hours going, what am I going to wear tomorrow? What's this image of perfection that I want to show to the world? But I think if actually we're all just more human and honest and vulnerable, I think when you get down to
Love
it,
that.
you realise that yeah, we all struggle with different things for different reasons at different times.
Yeah.
So,
but no, what I really love the title of your book, because it's called The Confession, isn't it? A Journey to Acceptance. I'm just wondering where the title came from, because that really struck me.
Yeah. So I guess the other part of my story that we haven't hit on yet is that when my dad took his own life, he left a confession to the police,
Right.
in which he said he'd been inappropriate with me.
Okay.
And that came as on top of him passing away, that then came as a real shock, because it was something I had no memory of at all.
Right.
And so part of my therapy journey for a long time was trying to discover, well, did he abuse me or didn't he? And I got very, very caught up in that for a long, long time. And actually, without giving a big spoiler for the book, then I had to come to the point where I went, I don't know, and I will never know. And that is okay too, because I am the person I am now, whether that's happened or whether it's not happened. And so I guess that is the acceptance, that is the peace.
That's we wanted to bring that in, that kind of the peace.
And that I now really protect that peace for myself, I guess. And if
and that you're
means
okay with doing it as well, with everything else and the other life demands, that's your important thing.
Totally. And even if that sometimes means going, I'm not going to come to your party, which might sound quite mean, but I just know that I feel safer, happier, more content, more able to be a positive influence if I'm not in those big loud spaces.
Being okay with what you need and what you don't need. Again, that inner critic, I'm sure, sometimes has things to say about that. All the lovely rule-bound living, should do, must do, haven't done, all of those fantastic things that our brain likes to send us. But I absolutely love that you're very congruent. You know what you want. Good boundaries, actually.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, boundaries is a really interesting word. I never knew that I was allowed to have them as a child. I never knew they were a thing. I really think there's something that we should bring into the education system. We should, teach.
You're absolutely right. Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
So
I wonder how many people as adults now go, I didn't know what they were, because people didn't really talk about things, for our generation as they would do now. So I talk, with my children about boundaries, more familiar with the concept, how to put them in. If they're not sure, we can discuss it. That wouldn't have happened, in my day. Certainly wasn't talked about at school, and I think it's a really important thing to bring up, really do. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, for the people that come to the groups that you're involved in, or anyone who's looking in their local area, just how useful your lived. I'm more and more now invite guests on that lived experience is so important to be able to share, isn't it? You can be a clinician and you can have some theoretical knowledge, but for me, there is something about that lived experience and what people would get from coming to a group that you're involved in, I just think is incredible. And also that you're sharing. I mean, thank you for coming on here and sharing, this is your personal journey, penning it, getting that book out there. So if people want to find more about you, where do you hang out? Do you hang on socials? Do you have a website? Where can we find you?
Huge on socials. I do have a website, which is maikemullenders.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a Facebook page which is called it's called Trauma Recovery Journey to Acceptance.
We'll make sure all of these are in the show notes for people so they can just click
And if you're ever in Reigate and after a yoga lesson, I teach at very yoga in Reigate. So
I'm in the queue for that, because I'm down the road from you, aren't I, in Horsham? So I will most
really
definitely
lovely.
be coming to find you and trying that. It's going to be something I'm going to look forward to doing it. Where can we find your book?
So the book is available on Amazon and all good bookshops, I've been told. So
So I will put links to that as well into the show notes. Now, one of the things that I always love to ask my guests, we've had so much from you, but if there was one little adversity takeaway, one little nugget, some little snippet of something you could leave us with, what might that be? Something that we can just go away and reflect on.
I think be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. You know, we're always told be kind to others, but be kind to yourself. And you're not alone. I think we can get caught up in feeling so isolated. You're not alone. Yes, we're all unique, but you're not alone, you know, and try and find the spaces where you can connect and share. Just very briefly coming back to children, and one of the spaces where I healed massively was in the East Surrey Twins Club, because everyone had this same experience. I think it's about finding your space, and I'm not saying groups are for everybody. I know they're not.
I kind of finding your tribe thing I quite like, you know.
Totally. I mean, you know, or talking to a therapist, but I guess just not holding it all in. And also if the first therapist relationship doesn't fit, because there is, I think, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but there is an element of it has to fit.
Oh, that's my number one. I always say to people can have the clinical background that you need, but the fit is the most important thing. And it's okay if the fit's not there. Always say that. And that can come from either side. It has to be that you feel safe, supported, and the fit's right. And ask away. Get a feeling, get that vibe from your therapist to make sure it's right for you.
Yeah. But you're not alone. That would be my biggest takeaway. And be kind, even if you feel you're alone, you're not. It's just a case of.
I'm thinking, even if you're starting to listen to podcasts and you've discovered this podcast and think, that's me. I've had that experience where I've never talked to anyone. This is your first experience. There's you, there's me, there's this podcast, there's a community here. The show notes, the links. What I think we'll also do in your show notes, let's put some links in, support links and things as well for people. So we'll put some links to the SOB groups, and as a little first protocol people. I think that would be nice. I'm so pleased to meet you. I'm definitely going to be up to Reigate to come and find out what you do.
Amazing.
Let's keep in touch as well.
Lovely.
A lot of people end up coming back on my podcast again, so some people have done multiple episodes, because we were talking about parenting. We've got some parenting ideas. I think I haven't done enough parenting. I've only done one podcast on parenting, and we had a couple of ideas, didn't we, before we were recording this?
Absolutely. My children might have a few words to say about my parenting.
I was going to say, you might have to do that episode kind of incognito and not tell our teenagers that we're doing that. Or, I don't know if mine would listen anyway. Actually, I'm probably far too embarrassing. This is my podcast. It's been so lovely having you.
You
and
too.
I can't wait to get this episode out there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.